Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lightcast webinars. Thank you so much for joining us today as we unpack the skills journey organizations are on with some practical tips on how to get started and the benefits of adopting a skills-based approach. If you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will endeavour to answer them as we go through the presentation. I will be sending out the slides and the webinar recording after the presentation is finished in a follow-up email, so please keep your eyes open for that. We have some very exciting guests with us today, but first I'd like to introduce you to Gary Mee, who is Lightcast's Account Director. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to you, Gary. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Debbie. Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gary Mee, Account Director here at Lightcast. Just to give you a brief overview on Lightcast, who we are, what we do, for those of you who don't know. We're the global leader in the collection and big data analysis of information on the labour market. So our data provides the world's most detailed information about occupations, skills that are in demand, and career pathways. So whether you're interested in software salaries in Seattle, or need new skills in New Zealand, or looking for anything in between, Lightcast data can provide you the insight that you need. So today's webinar, we'll be looking at, the subject is becoming a skills-based webinar, and we've got an expert panel about to talk this through. So what I'll do now is hand over to my colleague, Matt, who will introduce you to the panel and kick the webinar off. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Gary. Good afternoon, everybody. Stellar panel. Just people are going to ask this: are Gary and I related? No, we're not, but we do share the same surname. So nice to be here. I'm Matt Mee. Work with Lightcast, helping innovate to serve our customers around labour market questions that they're asking. The stellar panel that I'm going to be quizzing today, we've got Elizabeth, Mark from the Lightcast team, and Simon. So I'm going to ask them to briefly introduce themselves. Let's start with Elizabeth, if that's okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Crowfoot. I'm a senior economist here at Lightcast, and I started my career at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I have about 20 years of experience analyzing U.S. and global data sets. So labor markets is my language. Here at Lightcast specifically, I'm in the consulting arm of the organization, so I spend time with clients, really talking through some of their talent-based, skill-based challenges and trying to find solutions for them. So that's really, where I'm here today, trying to give some insight as to some of the experiences that our clients have gone through, and hopefully that'll be helpful to everyone here today.
Amazing, and thanks for joining us, Elizabeth. Really appreciate that you're
happy
here,
to be here.
Looking forward to some of the insights you're going to share with us. Simon.
Hi everybody, my name's Simon Haynes. I'm CEO and founder of Simply Get Results. We're a right skilling platform. We use Lightcast data to help big corporations ensure they have the right skills for now and the future. I've spent my career helping senior HR and business leaders use data and insight to make the most important decisions across the workforce. And thank you all for including me today.
No, great to have you here, Simon. Thanks for that. And last but not least, Mark. Welcome.
Thanks so much. Thanks for hosting this today, Matt and team, and excited to be here. Yeah, Mark Hansen, I help on our strategy side here at Lightcast, really focus around our skills products, as well as just research and consulting around skills and facilitating wonderful engagements with our customers. Previously, I was a Lightcast customer for 5 years, helping lead the United Health Group People Analytics team. Our UK friends would know us better as Optum, the arm that's focused on the UK market. But yeah, I got to spend wonderful time there, combining internal and external insights, and now I get to sit on the other side and focus on the external insights with our team at Lightcast. So thanks for having me.
Brilliant, thanks, Mark. Before we start and sort of get into the panelists talking about their perspectives of how organisations are tackling skills, I thought it will be useful to share a bit of context. And for me, the way that we kind of start this, we were at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it really resonated to talk about, well, why do skills matter? At the outset, I would kind of go, do business leaders care about skills and what's happening in the labour market, sort of at a sort of more granular level? And if we look at a couple of the stats here, so in the latest World Economic Forum and Manpower research, you've got 75% of organisations who are talking about they're facing skills or talent-based shortages. So the war for talent that we've known of for many years continues. And in the latest Deloitte report, this is the CEO survey from February this year, we've got 48% of CEOs who are putting skills and talent shortages in their top 3 business risks. So what's clear for me is that the business cares, and that this is a significant challenge that we're facing, not just in the US and UK, but across the globe. More broadly, then, if we look at the pace of change, and there's lots of research now on how skills are changing, but we've got the research from the LinkedIn economic graph, we've got the skills disruption index, where we can see that the pace of change of skills is significant, and we're seeing that in slightly different timeframes across the two data sets. But most importantly, I think the latest World Economic Forum reports, one is staggering number, right? 1 billion jobs that are set to be radically changed in terms of their skill, the skill portfolio that are required over the next 10 years. And then I think it was a couple of weeks ago that the latest Future of Jobs report came out. So here we've got an estimated 44% of jobs that are expected, skills profiles are expected to change in those jobs over the next 5 years. So the kind of the timeline and the pressure that we're under across the labour market is significant. I was just going to go and a bit of research that we conducted last year and published last year, and I mentioned it, the Skills Disruption Index. So 4 key themes in that, right? We've got kind of the change of digital skills in non-digital jobs. We've got the rise of analytics and visual communication becoming imperative. Increased demand, as you would expect, on soft skills, particularly in those digital occupations, and then kind of this whole rise of social media skills, which is critical for commercial organizations to know how to leverage social media to engage with customers. But the thing that I think is most interesting here is looking at not all jobs are equal in terms of skills profiles, and if we look at that index, we can see that there are jobs in the technical world where the pace of change of skills is incredibly fast, data engineers being at the top of the tree. But we've also got non-technical jobs, talent acquisition, chief executives, physicians, musicians. So jobs are changing across the labour market. And I think that's the context, whatever industry you're in, whatever geography you're in, is skills are changing. And that's why organizations are looking at skills-based transformation as part of their next evolution of how they manage their workforce. So a bit of context, I'm not going to talk any more about that. I think for me, the thing I'd like to do is actually engage with our panelists and kind of get their views on this, because they've been working in the sector for many years. If we could start with Simon, so the velocity of skills change that we're seeing, Simon, what's your take on it, and is it as important as the data sort of shows us?
Yeah, well, look, as you said, Matt, it's very important, and at Simply Get Results, we use Lightcast data in our software to track over 30,000 skills in terms of supply and demand and what's changing. And we do that to help our customers understand and stay ahead of what's changing. In terms of velocity of change, speed of change, it's interesting that some things remain consistently steady, and it's important to know about those. Communication skills remains the #1 skill across functions, across industries, everywhere. So good to know and good to dig into that. And yet many skills are changing by 10 times, 20 times, 50 times in terms of volume. So what we look at is not just the velocity, the speed of change, the nature of change, the significance of that change, so that customers can stay ahead of it. And as you said, in terms of importance, skills gaps are now a board level company threatening issue. So CEOs do care. This couldn't be more important.
It kind of resonates, doesn't it? And Mark, would you build on that at all? I mean, what have you seen in terms of the speed of change?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as we see how companies have had to pivot through a global pandemic, how they have seen labor shortages and not getting the people that they actually need to produce what they want. I mean, we even see a lot of the U.S. actually companies are restating their projections because there's not enough production capacity to actually do it. There's enough demand for the products and services, but not enough capacity. So as you think about how do we need to pivot our workforce in light of talent shortages, in light of being able to navigate any sort of economic or political climates that are changing constantly, having a lens on skills is critical as you think about what are the future jobs that we need to be thinking about. How do I need to transition the workforce I have today, because I don't have that talent readily available for me, so I need to get really creative, and skills gives us a kind of a lens into working those different talent management strategies and recruiting strategies and mobility strategies to kind of have an emphasis and a focus on that.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And Elizabeth, I mean, interested in your perspectives on this one as well, just in terms of any differences or other observations that you build on that.
Yeah, just a couple of things. And one thing I want to double down on what we see on the slide here is just the intense shift of having digital skills and non-digital jobs, and then soft skills and digital occupations. And what that means is that increasingly workers need to be a jack of all trades. In HR is a great example of this, right? More and more you need to be familiar with data analytics, different software platforms, right? All of these traditionally non-technical roles are now becoming more and more digitized, and especially when it comes to labor shortages as well, and especially in Europe, right? We're seeing a lot of the aging of the population. There are more people that are leaving the workforce than are entering it, and it really means that skills development has to happen faster. And that transition from people that are leaving the labor market to younger workers, that transfer of skills also has to happen faster. So this is all of movement across all parts of the labor market, all parts of the employee journey throughout an organization. You're going to see that speed of change trickle through all the way down.
Yeah, that's really interesting perspectives. And I guess organizations, my sort of take on this would be organizations are all at a different phase of the journey, right? And they've got to tackle their own needs, but the context will be different. Mark, I know we've done some work around helping organizations understand, well, where are they on the journey and how do they work out where to start? And we've created the maturity model, I guess, around what do organizations need to put in place around skills? Is this something you could just talk us through the rationale of how this was built and how organizations might use it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as we sit down with organizations, many are really confused on where did we even start on a skills-based journey. Obviously we covered why it's important, but really it's hard to define, where to start. Where is the value going to be delivered? How do we even, put our arms around this and bring some alignment and continuity to our existing strategies? Maybe you've started some learning initiatives, or you've started maybe some light skills-based approach as you think about recruitment and using, skills-based recruiting. But really, as we take a step back, you look at the whole picture of what's going on. When you want to get started, we can see kind of the different areas where, what are some of the companies where it's unexplored, or you're just starting to develop. How do I move to get more mature in this so that it has that impact that we're expecting on the business? How do I bring my business leaders together? And so we focused on these pillars very intentionally on saying, whatever strategy and the reasons why you're going after a skills-based journey, it has to be connected to business value and your existing go-to-market strategy. And so let's focus there on making sure that we're doing this for the right reasons. And if we can tie it to those goals, then that's the first spot that we need to succeed. Then as we go into the skills strategy and governance and how we start to do that, and then some of the technical sides, those are the components that all need to come together. But none of those three pillars will work without stakeholder engagement and understanding who our executive sponsors are, who is going to do the change management and drive this across the organization. And so we see these four pillars being absolutely critical as you think about how do we move up this maturity model and this kind of growth stage of more more sophistication around our skills strategy. So those are the big things that we want to focus around, because you need all of these working in concert for it to work well.
Yeah, in other words, it's pretty complicated, right?
Yeah, well, people make it more complicated than they want. But I think if you do pull the right people into the right spots, it doesn't have to be complicated. And we always say, don't do everything at once. Start really small on some of those focus roles. We got to focus on pilots and proof of concepts, bringing in our technical folks, bringing in our senior leaders to make sure that we can start gaining that alignment. Because once you get everybody in the room, they all see the benefits of this. They see why it's going to be valuable, but they're too worried about the amount of work and the limited resources that they have. But as you start to piece it out and phase in the different elements, it doesn't become as cumbersome or complicated as it needs to be.
Yeah, but I think really sort of good guidance there to kind of say, hey, get your foundations in place as you're starting to think about approach skills. So if we, I'm just going to move on one more slide. I mean, if we kind of sort of summarize where we've got to, and then we'll get into some of the kind of real examples and kind of what can organizations do. So we've got kind of on the left-hand side, we've got a very dynamic economy that we know is changing pretty quickly. And the reality is that it's not so much jobs that change, whilst there's lots of noise about, all jobs being converted to AI. The reality is that the change in those jobs happens at a skills level rather than perhaps in a job title level. And so the driving force behind moving towards becoming skill-based is, the business case is ultimately you want to be more agile, you want to be more innovative. You spend your biggest operating expense for most businesses is going to be their workforce or their payroll costs. And so a high level, there's kind of examples we're seeing of how people are approaching what's driving that skill-based shift. We've got this whole concept of skill-based workforce planning, which Simon, I know you know a lot about. Mark, you mentioned it. We've got this kind of whole drive towards recruiting more strategically. And then you've got that, how do you develop and where do you invest in your workforce through a skills lens? The e-learning market has taken off with a boom over the last 5 years and continues to grow exponentially. But then you've got, the interests of the individual, right? Is how do you manage people's careers? If you can manage people's careers and give them more skills, give them more opportunities, that creates a more engaged workforce, and that pays dividends in other ways. I'm just kind of a few questions on this slide that I kind of like to sort of throw out there. So, I mean, of the organisations that you've actually worked with, how are they approaching this skills transformation? What's driving it? And I guess, Simon, I mean, you've worked with lots of organisations. Could you give us your perspective on that? Simon, are you there? I can't see you guys on screen, by the way.
I think you're muted.
I have been unmuted. Thank you very much for our moderator in the background unmuting me. Much appreciated. Yeah, look, so companies, regardless of maturity, are now recognizing that data is essential to understand how the market is changing and to drive steps to achieve that transformation. At Simply, we help our customers break this down into manageable chunks, and there's 3 of them. And the first chunk is what we call skills strategy, and that's about understanding how skills are changing in the market, what this means for your organization, what skills your workforce really need, and then prioritizing the skills that matter most, the capabilities that matter most. So that's skills strategy. Secondly, skills architecture, and this is how fit for purpose is your current job architecture. How can you quickly and effectively blend skills into that, market aligned skills that are relevant and up to date? And how can you effectively analyze the skills data and use skills data across multiple HR systems? That's skills architecture. And finally, what we call right skilling, and that's taking the steps to make sure your workforce and your business have the right skills. And that begins with build versus buy. I know we're going to come on to this a bit later, but making the right trade-off choices between where you can develop skills in-house and where you should be looking at the market and finding the right balance of those.
Yeah, no, really interesting. And Elizabeth, of the projects and clients that you've worked with on this, what's driving them? What's kind of driving the desire to transform to a skills-based approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. And generally, what I've seen in my experience are two general use cases. And the first is where there's an organization that needs to address an urgent business need, and they use the skills-based organization or the skills-based approach as a short-term tactical solution to solve this concrete problem. The second is a more of a philosophical long-term approach to skill building, where organizations are really using skills as a primary framework for understanding and organizing talent, and just thinking more about long-term learning and development and being a future-ready organization based on those skills that they're seeing bubbling up in the economy. So to give a couple examples, the first is a manufacturing company that I worked with recently that did have one of these urgent needs. They were facing a very competitive market. They were falling behind their competitors. They were losing people to their competitors. They also, because of softening demand, they were thinking about doing some layoffs, and they wanted to avoid all of that. So this was a very time-sensitive transformation. And what we did is we went in and we helped them map their skills to their jobs and to re-architect their roles to really be more skills-oriented. And that was to help them redeploy workers throughout their organization to the areas of the business that were doing better, to avoid layoffs. So that was, one very just urgent need that they needed us to come in and help with. Another company that I worked with recently was a medical device company, and they had more of this long-term perspective. They started with the philosophy about skills-based, the value of skills-based, really the value proposition of going in that direction. And they wanted to build like a constant flow of skill building throughout the organization. So we came in and helped them with mapping their skills ontology to their learning objectives, which ultimately were fed from their business goals. And they also had a third-party organization that came in and did an assessment of their employees on their proficiency levels of different skills. So we used that data and layered it on top of the skills ontology and their learning objectives and helped them develop career pathways that would drive retention, and also give them concrete suggestions on how to fill those skill gaps, where training was needed, what specific skills, what specific roles. So they could really, they know where they were in terms of their assessment of skills. They knew where they wanted to be, and we helped them find that journey, find that path, or define that path as to how to fill those gaps.
Wow. Okay. No, that's, really, really interesting and very different use cases, right? So it could be a short-term burning need, business issue. How do we manage something immediately? Or it could be more strategic, long-term. In terms of philosophy. Simon, have you found that as well? Does it tend to be kind of an immediate need, or a more strategically driven initiative that brings you to work with clients?
If you'll forgive me for sitting on the fence, it tends to be a balance. So organizations recognize that they've got pockets of pain and pockets of urgent need. And so, of course, we lean into that. It's the right thing to do, as Mark said, start with a pilot, achieve some quick wins, build confidence, build support, prove something, do something. So we absolutely lean into those urgent needs. It's a great way to start. But at the same time, organizations are then starting to think about, what does this mean longer term? Fixing your skills is not one and done, because the marketplace is going to continue to change, your organization will continue to change, and the workforce will continue to change. So therefore, you need a way to embed that and sustain change on an ongoing basis, which after your first initial wins becomes the next stage of the journey.
Interesting. No, thanks for kind of painting a picture there. And I'm intrigued as well about, Mark, your experience around the change management process that companies have gone through, because we've worked with lots of companies in this space. So what have you seen there around how companies are approaching the change?
Yeah, obviously, as Elizabeth was saying, it comes through, some of those short-term pains. So that's usually how this bubbles to the surface. I think in general, from the long-term perspective, companies are just feeling the frustration of not having the data that they need to manage their talent effectively. And so it's kind of this two-way approach, and I feel like there's this meeting of the minds now of the executives are feeling the pain from just feeling like, okay, I want to make some changes, I don't know how to do this, I want to like manage my turnover more effectively, but I don't know, below the definition of a job title, which is often pretty vague within companies, I don't understand like how my business is running, where things are moving. And so as we think about that, we're finally putting the kind of the technical frontline leaders that are feeling this pain acutely with how they're trying to just organize the data and manage the people, and the executives coming through. And so I think it's really important to have that executive buy-in, because that's how things move a lot faster within organizations. So we always say, as the start of the change management, if you could have one key executive leader that can sponsor this transformational work, can sponsor bringing and aligning the work streams that are already taking place. Maybe there's some initiatives that have been started, but they're very disjointed, and there may be pockets of where it's just in learning, or it's just in recruiting, or maybe there's a small workforce planning team that's piloting a few things. Those executives have the ability to kind of bring those in alignment, and to be able to start to map this out on a journey and say, okay, where are the critical areas that we need to start first? And then what is the sequencing that would make the most sense? And so one of those, quick, spots is just analyzing the tech that you have, and what are all the systems that your employees are interacting with, your workforce planners, your recruiters, what's gathering that skills data? And then how do we start to say, okay, let's organize that, let's get the foundation set, let's look at our skill taxonomy, let's look at the information we have today, and now where do we need to go gather more data? Where do we need to tap the shoulders of these? And it eventually gets all the way down to the managers and working with the employees to have skills-based conversations. But it's hard to have those conversations without some starting set of data, some starting systems that are enabling and empowering those conversations. And so those are kind of the flows and sequencing we need to think about as we start this transition, is making sure we have that executive sponsor flow it through our systems, and then eventually get down to those key employee and manager conversations.
Yeah, so a real people, process, technology, change management methodology, right? And so you've got to get lots of things lined up. Simon, have you had a similar experience around the change process, executive sponsorship and technology, or what have you seen?
There we are. Yeah, look, to build on what Mark's saying, firstly, because the becoming more skills-led impacts such a broad range of stakeholders, from C-suite through leaders and managers through to every employee, and even every potential applicant, change management is super important. And that requires data, and it requires leadership. And one of the things we're seeing is the rise of the capability lead, someone who plays that role Mark's talking about, that plays that sort of midfield or quarterback or central role, coordinating others. Those jobs don't always share a job title, and they don't always come from the same place. So there could be lots of people watching the webinar today who are in those roles, or would like to get into those roles, or should be stepping into those roles. So I would certainly encourage that. And in fact, one of the industry analysts, Niles Nolan, are predicting the rise of the chief skills officer. So maybe that's where all of this could end up going.
Maybe that's the case. We will see, right? Or maybe HR will be renamed skills. Stranger things have happened. So, I mean, and before we move on from this section, I just want to get a sort of a quick straw poll from the panelists around, we have lots of fads in HR. We have things that come and go. Is skills one of those things, or is this actually a game changer for what HR does and how workforces are managed? Elizabeth, what's your take on that? Is Elizabeth on mute?
Looks that way, but hopefully we'll be unmuted soon.
No. Elizabeth, you're on mute.
Am I unmuted now? I can't, toggling back and forth. Okay, great. That's a really interesting question, because I think in terms of a macro perspective, it is seismic, right? We just talked about the speed of change and all the effect that organizations are feeling. But when you're actually talking about implementation of a skills-based approach within an organization, I think it's important to think about the evolution of change and not as a revolution, right? Mark talked a little bit about this, that you really have to think about things in small portions in terms of pilots and in thinking about your most critical roles or parts of the organization that need this change. So that's how I would maybe bundle this or put it into more of a digestible, manageable approach, right? Because otherwise it is a seismic shift and it's unmanageable. So within the organization, the skills-based approach is key for addressing different types of problems, like labor shortages, for example. So extending or expanding external talent pools, for example. Right-sizing job descriptions can really help with that. So focusing on must-have skills rather than degree or work experience requirements. That's one strategy. Another is developing internal talent pools using a skills-based approach. So attaching skills to profiles, to role profiles, or enabling career pathing, or just being really transparent about how employees can fill their own skill gaps to advance their careers and think about mobility within the company. So all of those are just more micro manageable approaches to this seismic shift in what we're seeing in HR and the labor market more holistically.
No, really, really poignant points there. And I think, Simon, would you agree with that, or what would your take be?
Is this here to stay 100%? The problem isn't going away. In fact, it's getting worse, not better. And you shared some statistics at the beginning, Matt, around the fact that changing in skills is an increasing problem. So the problem isn't going away. The question, therefore, for me is, are the solutions that we're talking about here, data-led solutions, are they here to stay? And when you've been in this industry as long as I have, since the 90s for my sins, what you see is you see big HR initiatives come and then stay and become mainstream, whether that's shared services or outsourcing or data analytics or best of breed technology. Those things have gone from not existing to arriving and staying. And I'm happy to join the crowd that predicts, yeah, skills-led organization, this concept is here to stay, because the problem's not going away. We need this solution. And I think more and more organizations are getting wind of that and leaning into it.
I was at a conference in Barcelona a couple of months ago, and we had a whole audience of people analytics leaders from some of the world's largest companies. And I asked the audience a question, which was, how many of you are trying to grapple with the skills agenda and this transition? And to say that the whole room put its hand up would be an understatement. And they were all struggling with it and going, well, we know we need to grapple with this, but where do we start? So interesting. Okay, we're going to move on. I mean, and again, I don't want to, we've kind of touched on some of these things already, but quick wins are, I think there's been kind of a consensus from the panel that, look, you don't have to do big bang on this. There are ways of making progress and kind of getting the buy-in and delivering results. What do you guys think is the best approach to quick wins? Can I come to you, Mark, first, if that's all right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is not a comprehensive list, but it's a good starting list as you think about kind of the full life cycle of, well, how do we think about building jobs, then putting people in those jobs, and then moving those people around to the different jobs. It kind of covers a smattering. And the spot that we like to talk through with our customers is saying, like, where are you feeling the pain points the most? Where is your maybe highest turnover, or where is it you're struggling to hire people, and you're just not getting the quality of hire that you think, or you're not the volume of people. And what often we get is like, yes, those are pain points, but I really don't know what skills and where do I even start? And so we tend to focus on the job architecture first, and really going to that structure of how our jobs are created and saying, this is actually something we control 100%. We actually, it's really hard to get employee skills, and candidate skills is a little bit easier because we can, extract skills off a resume, but getting employees to fill out anything on any sort of technology it's like pulling teeth, and there's not a behavioral sort of mechanism yet to like convince them that this is a good thing. And so you get an employee's entire career history. It's not necessarily what they need to do in that job that they've been hired to do. And so we say, before you go after employee or candidate skills, which is a worthwhile effort, we need to have that comparator, and having a skill profile on our job architecture is really critical, because we say, this is the skills that are needed to do this job. These are the things that are going to be required. So if we have that baseline, that's what we can compare. And when we do get the employees to fill out something, or we can capture that from the candidate flow and they get put into that job, now we have that skill gap or that skill overlap analysis that we need because we have that baseline sort of structure in place. And so that's something that companies readily have access to. It's a quick download out of their core HR system that they're using that's housing all of their job descriptions and job title sort of structure. And we can start working with that and inferring skills and building skill profiles from that. And that can be started with any other, recruiting strategy, workforce planning strategy, assessment strategy, whatever it might be, because that can be done in tandem. So those are one quick win, is saying, let's understand our structure first and how our business is operating, and let's dial that in first, and then we have that first piece of the puzzle that we'll need later for sure.
Yeah, and I guess the constant challenge with that, and having worked in HR for 20 plus years, is job descriptions are notoriously bad, right? So, but Simon, what's your experience of that, and any comments on what I just said as well would be awesome.
Well, look, I think you've got a fantastic list of menu items here that could produce quick wins for anybody watching, and I love Mark's example. And yeah, Matt, look, job descriptions tend to be out of date and not have skills that meet the market. So fixing that is a great thing to do. If I were to make one build, I would pick on one concept with two really powerful use cases, and the concept is about role and skill adjacency. How similar is one thing to another? And we all use data to answer that question, to show it. Why is that so powerful? Firstly, for building skills, is to understand the relationship between the skills you've got and the skills you really need. Because where there's similarity, that development pathway is going to be faster and easier and cheaper and more effective and accessible to everybody. So adjacency in terms of skill building to help you get from A to B. But secondly, adjacency in terms of reaching out into the market. What the concept of adjacency does is it broadens talent pools. Instead of asking for a very narrow and specific skill that everybody's fighting over, therefore the cost is going through the roof, and lots of organizations are suffering from that. Take one step to the side and say, what are the nearest skills to the ones that I really need? And what you find is, I heard a stat that came from Microsoft that apparently that approach can multiply the talent pool by 20 times, which is pretty exciting. It just gives you the better chance of getting the skills you need regardless of the budget of your organization.
Well, and that leads really nicely, Simon, into ROI, right? So yeah, at the end of the day, a CEO or an HR director is only going to invest in things that they say make sense and hit the bottom line. So, I mean, in terms of that, Mark, I mean, you've done a number of projects in this area, but so what have companies done around ROI, and how are they measuring it? And maybe some examples that we've got a few on screen, but of things that you've managed in your career would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the ones that I can draw on from my previous time at United Health Group is really focused on kind of that bottom example there of, just saving money through reducing requirements. I know when we were hiring for kind of call center and back office sort of workers at United Health Group, it was really expensive to advertise for those roles, to take them through some basic assessments and pay for those assessments, to screen them. And we started analyzing, why do we need a 4-year degree on this particular job? Do we actually need 1 year of experience? Let's run a pilot and actually just take off those degree requirements, because these people are getting paid hourly to answer phones and direct calls and answer some basic questions. Do we really need that much education? Do we really need that much experience? Because we run them through training anyway. So let's just open up the volume of our kind of funnel of candidates flowing through, just so that we can have more to assess and more to drive to that quality of hire. And sure enough, we doubled our pipeline of folks coming into those and seeing those jobs. When we remove those requirements, we actually saw quality go up, because the managers were able to see more examples versus saying, hey, I just have to pick the top 10 from a small pool. I'm able to kind of see a broader pool and actually get back to more of where we see potential, and those assessments worked a lot better. And so that ended up saving a lot of money, because we would track the kind of the quick, what we call the fast turnover that would come from that. And so those were kind of our determined, like there was either a bad job preview, or there was, we didn't screen properly, or maybe the hiring manager was making some bad decisions. Those quick exits actually decreased as well when we were able to kind of focus on the right skills, reducing those requirements, and it certainly reduced our cost to hire, which was a good thing.
Yeah, nice example. Elizabeth, have you seen other types of examples, sort of outside of perhaps the recruiting space, but maybe in the learning space, but anything that you think is relevant to share?
Yeah, and actually all of these examples here are ones that we have worked with in my team specifically. And to give the audience a little bit of an idea of where these numbers come from, the idea is to estimate the labor cost saving per employee or hire based on various skill-based initiatives. So what we're doing here is we're estimating the salary premium associated with a particular skill. So if you think of data scientists, for example, you can think of them as having, machine learning, or many of them now have machine learning skills. So we compare the average salary of a data scientist with that machine learning skill with the average salary of a data scientist that does not have that skill. And it's that differential, that's the salary premium associated with that particular skill. And that's the per skill cost savings of building that skill internally versus buying it on the labor market. So those are the first two examples here is, what are the cost savings that these companies, that a retailer or a manufacturing company really saw by building training in-house rather than buying these IT or other supervisory type skills on the market. And we can do the same type of calculation for 4-year degree requirements, for example, looking at the cost savings or the salary premium associated with a specific degree or a specific credential. And that's the same example that you see down there at $16,000 per hire if you eliminate that 4-year college degree.
So it's very similar to the skills adjacency concept that you talked about, Simon, right?
I absolutely agree.
Yeah. Now, I know one of the things that we've done, Mark, is talk about kind of the importance of the change process we've kind of touched on, but the people elements of that process. And we've, in the projects that I know you've delivered, kind of this 5-step model. Could you just give us a very quick elevator for the audience to kind of think about how they might approach this kind of change program?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's pretty simple. I mean, most plans start with diagnosing and planning and kind of getting into what do we have, where are the conversations happening, where are the initiatives happening, what needs to happen. So that diagnose spot it's not overlooked, but we can't stress the importance of that enough. And obviously planning, everybody goes into this planning, but I think as we think about the structure of what are the elements we need to think through, there's often some steps that people miss, like, oh, I don't see the value of a common skill taxonomy and why that's important. And so it's good to have kind of a checklist of things to kind of think through to say, we know we need to go somewhere. We know what the pain points are. How do I put the right frameworks and structures in place to have the right conversations? Give me those starting questions that I need to be asking my leaders in our different teams, and how do we bring this all together and start to build kind of the governance and the change management plans, and then move right into the architecture to say, now we got to really get into our systems. We got to get into our processes. What do we have? What do we need? Where are our gaps? And then bringing that together to hopefully get to that optimized stage of now we're actually able to inform those B strategies that we like to call them. So build, buy, borrow. What is the most effective and efficient way to move our talent and to bring talent in and to upskill our talent in the right areas, and which of those jobs actually make the most sense to start with. And so there's a lot of ways where there's gaps in the internal data that we're dealing with. And so as we can bring in external examples and some of that talent intelligence that we're able to bring in from like jobs that a company has, but they might not have the internal data to actually bring some of that data to light, we're able to kind of push that into all of these different phases of this full kind of journey, and being able to influence your technology by focusing on those integrations and data flows, being able to have, where do I even start with the best skills taxonomy? We love ours. We've open sourced it. That's why we love it so much. We want others to use it. We want our HR tech partners to adopt it and to feed that in so that we're all speaking the same language, and we don't have to have complicated technical integrations that constantly break and need to be updated. If we're all just using that same source language, that's going to unlock so much power for us. So we focus on all these elements, but it's really important to not skip any of these steps, because you're going to end up where we've been in the past, where you have starts and stops on really good projects, but they're not connected to business value, or they're not connected to, the leadership strategy of where we're going. So this is important things to remember, and then kind of walk through kind of some of these high level examples with your teams.
Yeah, no, really practical, keep things simple, but focus on outcomes, right? It seems to be a sensible starting point. And I don't want to dwell too much here because I'm conscious of time, but there was, Elizabeth, you've mentioned a couple of times kind of, ultimately a skills-based approach is helping to inform the Bs, right? And sometimes it's 4 Bs, sometimes it's 6, sometimes it's more. But I wondered your perspectives on, what's the business case around using skills to, or anything different to that you've already shared around skills-based workforce planning in particular?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to skills, it's really just an input into decision making, right? Data oriented, data driven decision making on talent, on compensation, as we saw from the previous slide as well. And also in terms of short run or long term planning, it can really help you with all of these different use cases and business cases. And it's just in each one of these examples, there's a skills oriented approach, right? Even, binding, we talk about retention all the time and the skills pathways, and even bouncing, like what are the skills that are dying? What we talk about hot skills, but there are also many skills that are moving out of the labor market. Blending or borrowing, what are the skills that you need to find gig workers for, contractors? What are those very unique skills that are hard to find in the labor market? So with all of these approaches, there's a skills lens, and it just helps really provide more of a directionality and magnitude as to the change and the speed of skills. And it goes back to how we started the conversation, and this is just the implementation of those approaches that we talked about.
Yeah. Simon, have you seen, like, some of these are more, we talked a lot about buy or kind of build, but which of the Bs are more important in your experience? What have you seen?
I'm going to bet on one, and it's build. And there's lots of reasons why you should focus on building skills. So it's the workforce you've already got. They value your investment and your focus on their skills development. It's always a top 3 requirement of staying in a job and progressing in a job. It is, depending on the stats you want to choose, around 6 times cheaper to build a skill than to buy a skill. When you build a skill, you're also binding and retaining. You're engaging and you're motivating. When you build a skill, you're also attracting people from the outside market into your organization. So I think there's lots of arguments to focus on build. Doesn't mean it's the only thing you should do, but you should almost always.
Yeah. Good advice. So it's not always easy. Some companies struggle with the process, and I've had direct conversations with clients where the business is pushed back. The business didn't want to put the effort into defining skills. What are your experiences of that? I can't remember who I'm coming to, but I think Mark would value your view on that.
Yeah, I mean the list of of ways to not get started is long. I think we can make a business case for those are no longer excuses. I mean the pace of change, as we've talked about, is so immense, and for us to remain relevant in in business, in the labor market, we have to be at the cutting edge of making sure that we're bringing the right people into our business, we're retaining them, we're building up that talent. As Simon mentioned, I mean, we need to be making those investments to stay relevant and competitive in the marketplace. And so as we think about the ways that we can kind of knock some of these down, implementation is taking too long, that's usually a company is bringing too much to the table, trying to bite off too much at once and try to implement something huge when we should have been starting a little bit smaller. And there's often times where people think that just because it's an HR strategy, the whole company's going to get excited about this new tool that we bought or this new process that we just put in place, and they forget that HR people kind of geek out with new assessments and new technology around this, and they forget that the rest of the business is just trying to get their jobs done, and they don't focus on always wanting to find the next thing to learn. That they think it's a distraction for their normal job. So we need to be thinking about the behavioral approach of what are the realistic expectations if we do roll out something? Can we actually get employees to buy into this? Can we change their behavior years? Can we get them to adopt this? And is it going to be, are the incentives in place to convince them to do this? And so I think as we start to put all this together, we need to ask realistic questions. Obviously, pilots and all the things that we talked about are a great, quick win system there, but the HR team is going to get very excited about all of these things, and the talent leaders are going to get excited, but we need to be really realistic of how do we fit this into the flow of work? How do we get people to buy into this? How do we convince our managers that this is good for the long-term growth, and it's going to make their team stronger? It's going to help with those retention strategies, and it's going to give those engagement wins from building up our talent. So switching some of these complaints into good questions, into good planning is going to be a helpful exercise.
Yeah, good advice again. Elizabeth, anything that you build on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one pitfall here is just this legacy way of thinking of many organizations, and people have a really hard time changing and shifting that mindset from using jobs to organize work to really thinking about skills as the driver and how skills can be used throughout the workforce, throughout the entire life cycle of employees and talent, from skills-based hiring to developing the composition of teams and career pathing and learning and development and even skills-based compensation. All of that can be integrated if you really move away from a job focused, centric way of organizing work to more skills oriented.
I wonder if it's as well, Elizabeth and Simon, value your view on this. HR systems are moving towards skills, and we know that there's a lot of investment happening there, but the processes that are built in the way that we manage our workforce they haven't really caught up with skills yet. What's your take on that, Simon?
Yeah, agreed. One of the things about skills and skills data is it's disaggregated, it's spread out. And that means that companies are trying to figure out what data have they got and what data have they got access to and where might they put it and how might they use it. And that's the right series of questions to be asking. But I guess the steer I would give is, don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. We've all been talking about the fact that you need to start somewhere and you need to make some progress. I think fear of imperfect data is probably the #1 blocker we come across, and it's just not right because no data is perfect. Guess what? We're all used to working with companies' imperfect, incomplete data, and that's just fine. That's the starting point we expect. So don't let imperfect data hold you back, and don't let perfection be the enemy of progress.
Yeah, nice analogies. I will copy those and plagiarize them for a future event. Thank you. So I mean, we're getting close to the wrap up because we want to finish on time. I guess some great observations. I've been fortunate to be at a few conferences this year and seen some really interesting talks around the transformation that organizations are on. So I'm stealing some of these points from those presentations that I've seen. One was from Serena Hung. There's a great podcast from Arcadis with Amy Baxendale. And I think, to sum up, there's this opportunity to connect skills to business outcomes. So don't sit in the silo of HR and thinking, oh, how do we grapple with this? It's think about the business in mind. And as we've talked about a lot in this webinar, kind of what are the quick wins that you can find and engage business leaders to really lead, support, drive the change. If this comes from within HR, it's going to be a challenge, right? Because HR initiatives tend to fail if they're not business sponsored. We've talked to Mark, you've talked a lot about kind of the process of how you embed this, the architecture, and then putting this through the system. So and again, this has been supported by people who've been through these journeys with big companies, right? Is integrating skills into the workflow of how you manage your workforce and business as usual processes is really important. Again, you don't have to re-engineer everything, but you've got to get things in place to make sure that the flow of work works and that people get on the bus rather than jump off it. And then I think for me, another key learning, and some of this conversation has been great, is around the recognition that not all skills are equal. And so how do you prioritize, as Simon, you talked about, the skills that are really going to have business impact. One of the things that Serena talked about is having, not having 50, 100 skills per role, is really nail it down to kind of priority skills. And there are clever ways to do that in today's world in terms of data models and ways that we can prioritize, well, what skills are really important for different jobs. So, I'd welcome any just general comments on that, guys, really. So Simon, I'll come to you first.
Look, I fundamentally agree with all of these comments, and I think if I were to add anything, it's just about the sort of the risk of not moving forward is going to outweigh the pain of moving forward, because not bringing your skills up to date is a company threatening issue business-wise and deeply painful for every employee on a personal level. To recognize that the risk and the pain of staying where you are is going to be far greater than actually just leaning into this stuff and making progress.
Yeah, no, good. Thanks, Mark and then Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think, obviously I agree with all of these. This is what we talk about on a daily basis with our customers. I think it's also helpful to note that, skills isn't a silver bullet. It's not going to solve every single problem. And so it needs to be embedded, strategically in the right areas. We've talked a lot with our customers that are saying, oh, we have a competency model, and that's been really helpful for us. I was like, absolutely. Skills doesn't replace a competency model. It just enhances what that is, and it gives more clarity into saying, here's the skills needed to do your job from a technical perspective, but here's the competency that we expect from that. We're going to measure your growth and be able to observe those behaviors and those changes. And so we think about any sort of skills strategy complementing what you're already doing, not replacing what you're doing, because it just gives us that framework and that lens to be viewing our work at a more detailed level that we've never had historically. We've always talked about skills for 20 plus years, but it's never been at this maturity level with our systems being able to capture those skills, with our people having a more granular focus on what's needed. And that granular focus comes from all the change that we've seen. And I want to be relevant in my career, and I want our business to be running at an optimal pace. So let's look at that more granular level, because we can always roll this up into capabilities and roles and jobs and however you have your structure. But starting at that granular gives us the most unique insights, the most tangible way that we can start to connect with the different elements of work and be able to pivot that quickly. But it's going to complement the things that we're already doing and the things that are effective. So don't think this is going to solve every problem, but it certainly is going to enhance most of the things you already have in place.
Yeah, no, great. Elizabeth, any final comments from you?
Just one last quick comment. I love everything on this slide, agree with everything that has been said. The only thing I would add is maybe the umbrella of the Skills Hub. And I think Mark mentioned this, but really the Skills Hub is like the engine that drives all the infrastructure around the skills-based organization, whether you're talking about your ontology, your technology, the common language that you have, the data, really your talent philosophy around skills. It's all in that skills-centric Skills Hub. So just want to really highlight the importance of having that within the organization.
Yeah, 100%. And I've spoken to lots of people who have started building skills taxonomies and then gone, oh my God. So please bear in mind our open skills program is there for all, and that's part of what we're here to do, is help the world evolve and utilize skills. So please, if anyone wants information on that, get in touch and we can point you to those resources. I'm not going to ask this as a question, I'm just going to finish on this note, but and I think, Simon, you kind of mentioned this is, not ignoring this is not really an option. So this is a quote from our friend Josh Bersin, and I think the sort of the analogy of, if you're not looking at skills, you're navigating without a compass, is pretty poignant. So talk to your HR leaders and your CEO and go, well, what's our plan on skills? I think that's probably a good idea. I'd like to thank Debbie, Gary, all of our panelists, Elizabeth, Simon and Mark, for joining us today. I hope that's been a useful hour of your lives. We'll be sharing the slides, as Debbie said. And if you've got any questions, please get in touch with us. But so thanks very much, everyone, for taking part. I'll now go and find out how my daughter did in her first GCSE exam. So wish me luck. Thank you very much.